Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Cedarville VACCRA meeting, January meeting. We have special guests to recognize here. I see our new Executive Director, Paul Gregg. Stand up, please, so people can look at you. Thank you for being here. We have Eldon Rucker here, our President of Resident Council, and our incoming President, Mike Greenwood. We're glad you're all here, and we're glad all of you are here, and we hope there are lots of people watching on live stream. As you know, this is a special meeting for us to learn and ask questions, so at this point, Carol Marco and James Green will take over. We don't know how many questions we'll have to answer. We don't know how much time we'll have left to answer your questions, but don't worry about it. We'll do it again and answer all of your questions later if we can't get to all of them now. Carol.
Good morning. Thank you for asking me to do this. It's a great honor to be able to try to explain financial information to residents. The first slide we're going to show you will be our agenda today, and to give you a brief idea of the things that we're going to cover. And I'm going to go right on to the first slide, the organizational chart. You notice in the organizational chart, the heading is Virginia United Methodist Homes Incorporated, doing business as Pinnacle Living. As you can see from the organizational chart, Pinnacle Living is separated into Pinnacle Living Obligated Group, which includes Cedarfield, 3 Hermitage homes, the corporate office, and a program called Pinnacle Advantage. Also under Pinnacle Living are 2 corporations, Windsor Mead, which is a continuing care community like Cedarfield, and a corporation called Hermitage Capital and Reserve Corporation. We say HCRC. HCRC is designed to provide income to Pinnacle by offering services to the continuing care community. All of these entities are non-stock, tax-exempt, or nonprofits. Pinnacle Living Obligated Group provides 3 financial statements, which is common for all organizations. They're a balance sheet, an income statement. For nonprofits, it's called a statement of activities and a cash flow statement. These statements reflect the totals of all the entities in the obligated group. Pinnacle only provides each entity in this obligated group a statement of activities. The other entities are corporations under Pinnacle and have separate sets of financial statements. A balance sheet, just for your information, shows assets, liabilities, and net assets. There is no equity section for those familiar with that, as nonprofits do not have stock. The statement of activities shows income and expenses. The cash flow statement shows sources of funds and uses of funds. Information required in financial statements are used both for projections of income and cost, as well as actual amounts. I have chosen Cedarfield's Statement of Activities for the year ended May 31, 2021, to illustrate how to look at our financial statements from Pinnacle. Let's look at the Cedarfield Statement of Activities, section by section. Amounts from the Cedarville Statement of Activities are put in the left column of our chart, identified as total. Operating revenues and support is in the first section. Resident fees are listed first. Residents pay a monthly service fee called residence fees or rent. Benevolent care shows what funds from the Samaritan Fund are used to support residents who have financial needs. Cedarville requires residents in the independent living residence to pay a one-time upfront entrance fee, which is partially refundable under certain circumstances according to their contract. Most of these amounts are invested to produce income and spread out over the expected resident's life. The income amounts estimated that are needed each year are called amortization of deferred revenue from entrance fees. This includes an assumption for move-ins, move-outs, transfers between levels of care. The actuarial service, A.D. Powell, gives us guidance in determining the life expectancy and future cost related to residents' immediate and future care. We use this to determine an approximate amount of revenue needed each year based on life expectancy. And these estimates are used to meet the bond requirements we have that show how much cash is on hand and how many days will it cover. Since amortization is an estimate, I have removed it and will later add back the actual amount used for the year. We can compare it later. Note the columns restricted funds and non-cash amounts are used to adjust funds that are needed for operations, and we'll hit those as we go through. Ancillary service revenue accounts from other sources that come in from activities and so on, and other operating revenue can cover anything and sometimes just one-time revenue situations. Total operating revenue for the year without our estimate was a little over $24 million, as you can see on my chart. Now let's go to operating expenses. Administrative expenses for 2021 did include COVID, which certainly was not a normal expense, but that's where it's located. Marketing and general overhead are self-explanatory. Depreciation expense is used to acknowledge that future costs for repairs and replacements will be necessary. It is calculated on the expected life of each asset. It gives us a starting point in capital planning, which has to be adjusted for inflation and increased cost. I have removed it from this example, and I will add and compare it later to the actual capital cost for the year. Donor restricted funds. These amounts are spent for a designated purpose. The neighborhoods and households, which come down to the last of those expenses, this is the largest amount you will notice of all of them, and it's for health care, which makes sense, I think. Shared expense allocation. This is the amount of corporate office expenses that we pay for their services. Currently, it runs approximately 9% of resident fees. The total operating expenses minus depreciation are a little over $24 million. Now, if you take the operating expenses from revenue, the funds used for operation at this point is negative in my chart of $105,043. This is commonly called operating income or loss in your standard vernacular, but nonprofits call it change in net assets from operations. We have some special terminology for nonprofits, but it means the same thing. Now our next slide is where we have the most estimates. Only some of these items can really be used for current operations. If funds received has a designated or donor requirement, they're restricted and can only be used for that purpose. Any funds spent were included in operating expenses that were restricted. The amounts here will be used as needed, and I have removed the following. If you look, you'll see bequests are under restricted, trust and legacies, present value of trust, contributions with donor restrictions, the Samaritan ones, and also the contributions with donor restrictions of other kind. Also excluded are amounts that are required to be reported and give the organization information as to future value. This is shown as unrealized gain or loss on investments. These investments have not been sold. It's just their current value if they were sold the day the statements were prepared. The third category that I've removed relates to bonds. These bonds have been issued and the upfront paid cost were incurred, but we are required by the association to amortize or spread out the amounts over the life of the bonds. So these amounts we take out from current cash needs. Note what is left has an effect on income. Gain and loss on disposal of assets, whether we junk them or sell them, if we make any money there, or loss. Unrestricted contributions are included in income. Investment income net of fees, these are investments we did sell. Realized gain on investments is also recorded. And one of our largest expenses, because of the bonds we owe, is the annual interest paid. Other non-operating charges and fees are also subtracted. So we list all of those items that we do subtract out, and you notice we're still at a negative number for non-operating. If we take this section and subtract it from our other section, we're going to come up with an amount of a loss, it looks like over $1 million, but we're not finished yet. So we don't have that loss. And that's where we have to start to pull in other information. So now I'm going to pull in information from other statements. Got it? All right, thank you. This information is coming from the balance sheet and the cash flow statements. And I'm going to use this to replace some of the numbers that I took out earlier. Since Cedarville doesn't have a separate balance sheet that I have access to or cash flow statement, I go to the Pinnacle statements and pull the information from there. The amortization, remember we pulled out, was $10 million plus now we're going to add back proceeds after first generation entrance fees, as this is the amount of actual monies that were pulled in and used for the year. So that's a source of income. This is the actual amount. We also had some refunds we had to give. Remember, it was not a good year. COVID hit us, so we had to pay back, because of circumstances, to people over $1 million. So we've got to take that out. Then one other number we're going to add in, the proceeds of first generation entrance fees were from the new independent living additions to cover D-wing bonds. And that was a decision that was made up front when they issued those bonds. The capital expenses are another deduction from income, and remember I referred to the depreciation expense as an estimate. Now look at the actual amount we spent on capital, $3,954,220. So we did certainly spend those, and it was a little bit less than our estimate, but it certainly has to come out of our funds. And now the bonds. The 2012 bond principal payment, which was for Cedarville expansion, other than D-Wing, was paid, and it was almost $2 million. Note that the 2019 B bonds were used for D-Wing, and the difference in the two numbers, which are close, covered some of the upfront bond cost. When we take this one section that came from other statements, you notice we have a positive amount. So if we now add the amount of $3,936,811 to our change in net assets, which was negative, we've turned it around. It's a positive number of $2,000,009. Now this is the actual amount that we did use, but what does the statement show? $15 million. So you're looking at $15 million, and somebody came up to me, oh, that's profit. It's not. It's closer to $3 million. And it requires that we take these statements and pull it apart and come up with more accurate realization of what we used or took in funds. As I said, accounting is not just actual. It's used for estimates, it's used for planning, it's used to help us determine where we need to go, what we need to do. And when we pull it apart, we get a better picture of the actual amount. So that's what our committee's job is, to pull this apart. Now, the next slides I'm going to show you were requested by some of the residents. Some people have asked, what's the cost of Cedarville expansion? And James, thank you, James, has prepared this wonderful slide showing that from 2017 through 2024, the projected costs are total to be $77+ million. So our expansion costs are up there, and if you relate it to our bond cost, it makes sense. Then we look at bonds. If we look at the bonds and project forward, which we're trying to do, the principal and interest will be about $7 million, a little bit over that, for the next 5 years. These bonds are much longer than that, but we're looking at about a 5-year summary to determine how much we need now. And the other thing that you've all asked for is the Samaritan Balance. And that balance is $1,500,000 as of May 31st, 2021. So that gives you an idea of where we are as far as protecting our residents who might have a financial need. And that's been my pitch for ages. I want to see that fund grow so that we never have to worry that a resident will have to leave because of financial need. Now, James, do we have time for questions? Good. Okay, let's see if we've got a microphone we can use.
Mike's available. Myra has one over there. I have one with Carl.
Oh, there's two mics?
Huh?
Nobody has a question?
No, we got three mics.
We can use this.
Okay.
We can manage. All right. Okay, James, first question. What, if any, concerns are raised by the auditor's notes to the annual financial statements of Pinnacle Living?
Audit comments are brought forward to the Audit Committee of the Board of Directors. If there are comments, management will respond to the Audit Committee addressing this comment. It's very important to note that Pinnacle Living has not received audit comments on the year-end financial statements for 11 years.
Thank you. Are there sufficient reserves for meeting the future health care needs of residents? For example, I received a medical deduction of a significant amount for my entrance fee as well as my monthly payment. Where does this money for medical expenses go?
Similar to other highly respected and financially sound senior living providers, Pinnacle Living ensures there is sufficient funds for the future health care needs of all residents. Annually, Pinnacle Living engages a third-party actuary to ensure the financial health of the organization. According to the third-party actuary, Cedarville is in satisfactory actuarial balance.
Who manages the money for Pinnacle? An investment firm?
The Board of Directors acts as the fiduciary of the organization. The Finance Committee of the Board of Directors approves the investment policy of Pinnacle Living and reviews performance results. To help guide the Board of Directors, Pinnacle Living utilizes the Actuarial Consulting Group, ACG, and its investment advisors.
How much is in the Samaritan Fund, which we just addressed? Is it invested to grow?
As of November 30th, 2021, there is currently $1,659,740, and yes, monies are invested.
Because of the business model that Pinnacle uses as a nonprofit, can we be certain they will remain solvent?
Similar to other providers, Pinnacle Living provides quarterly financial statements of the organization and each community. Those statements include debt service coverage ratio, days cash on hand, and overall unrestricted cash and investments.
Healthcare is a big issue for us. Can we be certain we will get the best health care here at Cedarfield when we do not know if there are reserves or how the financial decisions are made?
The board and management take the financial and personal health of the residents seriously. As mentioned, Pinnacle Living provides a full set of financial statement that includes all unrestricted cash and investments, as well as a number of ratios, all to provide transparency and comfort to the residents. This is the same information other providers provide their residents. Management ensures it monitors bed availability for life care residents annually. On top of this, Cedarfield management meets regularly with several committees, including the Finance Committee, to review decisions and try to understand concerns of residents.
Can you clarify the relationship between Pinnacle Living, Cedarfield, and the United Methodist Church as it relates to finances and any other connections?
Pinnacle Living and Virginia United Methodist Conference are separate organizations, but share a relationship statement with each other that is affirmed annually. Pinnacle Living does not elect any members of the conference, and the conference does not elect board members of Pinnacle Living. As part of our relationship with the Virginia Annual Conference, Pinnacle Living submits an annual report that is included in the conference book of reports. Because of this relationship, Pinnacle Living is permitted to solicit Samaritan program dollars with member churches at a designated time each year.
Thank you, James. That's the questions that we have, unless you have some now. Yes, Sally?
Hi, I'm Sally Wood.
One moment, microphone's coming.
Thank you. I'm secretary. James especially, could I have a copy of all your answers so that I could put them in one location in case people wanted to go back to them and study them?
Sure.
Sure, Sally would. And Carol, if yours are written up in a way, I would love to have it. I have no idea how I'm going to do these minutes.
May I comment, please?
Yes, as soon as you get the microphone.
My comment is that the picture that's shown to the people who are not able to be here is illegible. You need to adjust your equipment or rebroadcast it subsequently because you can't read it.
It is being recorded and will be available on the Cedarfield app under Resident Council later today.
In addition, there was an opportunity for every resident to pick up a copy of this financial statement in the mailroom. Perhaps we could put more copies out there.
Are they out of copies? I put some on the table.
They're all gone.
I have this minute.
Paul Gregg would like a copy right now. Thank you.
Yeah, if you give me an idea, I can make more.
James, I have a question. When I came here 11 years ago, there was not a 5 or a 10-year financial plan. Do we have that in place yet today? Second question. We really want to know if we are on solid ground and do not have to worry about the finances here. Pinnacle Living, Cedarfield have committed to us life care. We would like this financial clarified for us so that we trust and understand we are stable and solid.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fiske, for the question. So, your first question, can you repeat that one more time?
5-year and 10-year plans, are they in place yet?
Yes, if you look in the the annual disclosure statement, there's a pro forma that goes out 5 years annually. That should be in the disclosure statement, which is in the library. And every year I've been here, I've been posting that in the library, along with the quarterly financial reports for the bondholders. And when I first started at Cedarfield, the bondholder statement was 13 pages, and I believe it's, hold on a second. I think it's 85 pages now. But as to your second question,
First, how long are you here?
how long am I here? I'm an employee here. I work here.
I know. How many years have you served?
I've been here for 5 years. And then to your second question was concerns about sound financial ground on meeting the future obligations, not only for life care, but for anybody under a preferred choice agreement or anybody that has a daily fee agreement. So any resident, when you look at the financial statements, one of the metrics that our bondholders have, so our bondholders also review the financial statements, and we have obligations that are on page 6 of the quarterly report. And one of the metrics that used is called a debt service coverage ratio. So the covenant for the bonds, so the bondholders, the investors, is to make sure that you have a debt service coverage ratio of 1.2. The actual was 2.03. The next metric to look at is what's called days cash on hand. So what that means is that if you didn't take in any revenue for the next 12 months, how many days cash on hand do you have as an organization? And the bondholders said, we're comfortable with the covenant of 120 days. That's what the covenant for the bonds are. The actual days cash on hand are 403 days. In addition, into your life plan or life care agreement, preferred choice agreement, when residents come into Cedarfield, they are qualified for entrance into Cedarfield, and if through no fault of their own they outlive their assets, then they would qualify for the Samaritan program and would continue with their residency here at Cedarfield. Did I answer your question, Ms. Fiske?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dolly?
The cottages are 25 years old, many of them. Is there a contingency plan to keep them functioning and up to date always? Because it seems like the cottages always have some issues that have to be repaired or replaced.
So I understand your question in regards to maintenance and repair of the cottages. So we have in our buildings and ground budgets dollars allocated for maintenance and repair for all the different types of trades, whether it's plumbing, electrical, HVAC, lighting, the roofs for maintenance and repair. And we also look out and try to incorporate into our 5-year capital plan additional capital needs that would be met. And for example, on the cottages, I think we're in phase 3 of the roof replacement, where we've replaced, I believe, 40 roofs so far in the cottages. And so we still have on board to do the balance of the 40 as we space those out. And as we do resident renovations, as people move through the continuum of care, myself, the turnover supervisor, we go through and look at cottages and make sure that we bring them back up to standards. And then if there's anything in the interim that happens that needs to be repaired, that we have sufficient funds that we budget for in the Buildings and Grounds Department to cover such repairs, not only for cottages, but for apartments, for healthcare, assisted living, and memory care.
Thank you.
Come on, Marta.
This is a rather mundane question, but on the board of directors, there's a finance committee. Who takes care of seeing if they are actually finance people? I mean, their background, their credentials to make financial decisions. Do they have a finance background? For instance, Carol, she could be fine. I would not be fine.
So are you talking about the finance committee here at Cedarville?
No, I'm talking about the overall Pinnacle Living that we just looked at, all their finances.
Yeah. I had to defer that to our CFO, but I believe that you're, just like any board, you're nominated to the board, you have qualifications for the board, and then you get selected for the board.
That I understand. I'm talking about the finance committee.
I'll follow up with our
The
chief financial
subcommittee.
officer. I'll get back to you, Ms. Janelle.
Thank you, James.
There is a CFO for Pinnacle who has met with us and talked with us. And so we do have a relationship with who's head of finances at Pinnacle.
Correct. Our CFO is a CPA as well. It's on the CPA, and our controller, Robin Marks, she's also a CPA.
Good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions, Ms. Fiske?
I'm checking.
Okay.
Oftentimes, when we look at financial statements from Pinnacle Living, it appears that Cedarville is the only one that is profitable. Do any of the funds that are paid, that we pay to Pinnacle Living to maintain Cedarville, go to help offset expenses of these other locations like Windsor Mead and the Hermitage?
Right. So if you go back to your handout and you look at the first page or the organizational chart, does everybody have that? Right? So when you look at the Pinnacle Living Obligated Group, all of the revenue and expenses for all those communities are combined under the obligated group. So for example, you have the corporate office, Hermitage Northern Virginia, Hermitage Richmond, Hermitage Roanoke, Cedarfield, and our Pinnacle Advantage program. So that's one separate tax ID, one separate financial statements, one separate corporation. It's still managed by Pinnacle Living. You also have Windsor Mead, which their legal name is Virginia United Methodist Homes of Williamsburg. They're a separate corporation, a separate tax ID. They pay an administrative service agreement to Pinnacle Living, so they do pay an agreement to cover expenses for things that are shared or allocated from Pinnacle Living. And then the separate corporation, the Hermitage Capital and Reserve Corporation, is a third entity. So nothing is shared between the three except the management team, but as far as moving funds from one of these separate tax IDs to another, that does not happen. So when you pay your monthly fees, your entrance fee, you're paying an entrance fee for Pinnacle Living.
So just piggybacking on the remarks you just made and your question, I'm really delighted to hear you
define that clearly for us, because it is a long circulated, I will call it rumor, here at Cedarville, that we have been shouldering the expenses, the negative expenses of Windsor Meat particularly. That has something that probably in some way, James, should be corrected for the population here. I'm just letting you know that that is something that most everybody has come to accept and unhappily accept. So I'm very glad that you are setting it right. The other question I have a question. When we all moved in here, we signed an agreement. The agreement was pages long. Some of us had help when we came in with family, relatives, what have you, to try to understand it. I've been here going on 5 years. I would be hard pressed to tell you the details of what I signed. What I'd like to know is, in that agreement, is it clearly stated, particularly to new people coming in, what you just outlined as the continuum of care piece? Is it in writing?
Yes, when you look at the disclosure statement, it lists out all of the communities. It'll have the organizational structure, and it will also include the residency agreements for the different communities, and it'll also have the rates for the different communities as well. But when you're moving into Cedarfield, you are part of the Pinnacle Living obligated group. When you look down on your handout, there's 6 rectangular boxes. So you're part of one group. And when Carol mentioned in her presentation, she said she didn't have a balance sheet or a statement of cash flows for Cedarfield, it's because we're part of the obligated group and we roll up the Pinnacle Living.
I just wanted to make certain that those folks moving in understand that, how can I put this, that they're not making assumptions that aren't there in writing.
Correct. I have prospective residents that have said to the marketing team that, James, I've given the disclosure statement to this prospective resident and couple, and they have no idea what I'm trying to tell them. And I said, okay, I will meet with them. And so I would schedule a meeting, and I would sit down, and I would bring out either the financial report or the disclosure statement and ask if they have questions, and they do, and I answer the questions. And I've had some that were like, okay, and I think they were just nodding because they understood, but sometimes maybe they didn't. And I said, well, if you read it some more and you have more questions, feel free to come down to my office and ask me questions again. And I open that up to everyone here. If you have a question about your residency agreement or what something means, then, let that happen. I was speaking with...
It's when you go to the doctor.
Yes.
Sometimes you need to ask questions, but you don't know the question to ask.
Correct. I understand, and I understand that it's a very life-changing event when you're moving into Cedarfield. You have a lot going on, and the last thing on your mind is reading, your residency agreement word by word. But there are residents that do, and they ask me a lot of questions. What does this mean? How does this work? And I'll explain that to him or her or Pam. And we've talked with many financial planners and many families that have questions, and continue to answer any questions that anyone has on the residency agreement.
Thank you.
I have a question. Carol, in your remarks, Carol, on the first page, you listed neighborhoods, households, and referred to that as health care. Is that indeed health care, or is it all of the licensed areas?
all of the licensed areas. And the clinic is included under that. Oh dear, what's her name?
With the changes going on with the Methodist Church itself, and some particular churches branching off from it and not staying a part of the conference, how is that going to impact on us?
I'm not an expert at the Methodist Church, so I'm going to have to defer that question to Trish Carter or Florence Brooks or Martha Stokes at the Pinnacle Living office.
Yes, if you can get back to us, because that could be a tremendous hurt.
Yes, ma'am. I'll get back to them, Jacqueline. Thank you.
I think it would have any bearing.
I hate to continue on this point, but when you talk about Pinnacle Living, which is the top, the corporation, and all of our facilities that are beneath it, I guess my question is, does the Cedarfield money stay in Cedarfield, or does it become part of the whole pot?
So your question is that when we showed you the statement of activities, do all of those funds stay at Cedarfield? Is that your question?
Correct.
Cedarfield is part of the obligated group. So when all those funds are commingled with the other communities, there are things that are restricted to Cedarfield that was part of Carol's presentation. So when we showed, for example, the Samaritan program, that's restricted to Cedarfield. In the bondholder disclosure statement, you will see the different fund balances that when they have Cedarfield on them, such as the Angel Fund, the Flower Fund, Library Fund, Scholarship Fund, those are restricted and they can only be used at Cedarfield. Where on the other hand, there are other communities that have funds as well, and they could be only restricted if someone donated the funds to that community. So there could be, when you look at the Samaritan program, for example, at Hermitage Richmond, their balance on May 31st was 1.4 million, so that was restricted just for Hermitage Richmond residents. So if people make donations to the Samaritan program and you put, where would you like this donation to go? You could select any of the communities, you could put Cedarfield, or you could select, wherever the need is greatest.
Well, that I understand all that. My question is operating funds. The general operating funds that the money that we pay goes into the big pot, correct?
Right, all the communities commingle their revenue and then expenses, and when you put out the statement, it'll be for Pinnacle Living, but then it's broken out by community where the revenue and where the expense, and you'll see the different change in net assets. So when I believe Carol, when you do your quarterly report, she lists out all the communities and shows the change in net assets from each one, and then all of those are added up for Pinnacle Living.
So if one facility runs out of money, what happens?
Correct. So what those metrics that I just gave you, they were not just for Cedarfield. So when I'm talking about days cash on hand in the bond covenants, that's for the entire obligated group. So if when the actuaries are done and the pro formas are done and forecasting and creating the budget, everyone has to make sure that everyone has enough money to take care of the residents, provide service to the residents, make sure we're doing quality service, make sure we're investing in maintenance, repair, upkeep to take care of the residents' needs.
You might be interested in trying this little chart I gave out with the other entities. Because remember, I showed from the year end, we went from 15 million to 3, showing the actual amounts used and what we needed and made. I think you would be surprised that some people get the impression they only look at the bottom line. If you only look at the bottom line on a nonprofit, you're going to miss some of the information that isn't helpful to know. Did they break even or not? And I will say this, when I follow this now, several of these groups do fine. COVID hurt some, definitely hurt. Occupancy rates went down, and so we had a big change. But in general, they're not like you. People say, oh, they've lost so much money. If you take those statements apart, they haven't. They might have had a little downward trend or something, but you can't remember all those things I had to take out to really come down to the actual funds used. You have to do that for each entity. So be careful when you just look at the bottom line. It's not the true reflection of funds used. It gives us, remember, estimates, forecasting, all kinds of things. So that is a caution I try to give people. Please don't judge just on that one number.
Thank you.
So the Samaritan Fund, the 1.5 million, that's for all the United Methodist
No.
facilities.
That was Cedarfield's
That was
balance.
just Cedarfield's
Correct.
part. Okay.
As
Because
of
I
May,
know when
as
you
of May,
give through the church, it goes to whatever they put on their check. Like if they're giving to the Samaritan Fund, but you say which facility you're giving to. So that's why I asked that question.
yeah, correct. The total for all the communities on May 31st, or November 30th, 2021 was $3,370,072. It's on page 10 of the quarterly bondholder statement.
Thank you.
Question I have, it seems to me still unanswered. Might Cedarfield be supporting Hermitage, Richmond, Roanoke, and Northern Virginia?
When you say supporting, like what's your definition of? You're saying that.
Are we making a profit and covering losses at the other organizations?
Well, it could be difficult when you're looking at just from operations. There could be a loss at the other communities, but some of the other communities have like a large trust or a benefactor that was donated and restricted for that community, and that could be in the other non-operating expense or changes in assets from non-operations. Eddie's coming with the microphone.
So under operating expenses, this administrative portion is salaries?
No, it's when you look at administrative, you have salaries. There's expenses for like things that everyone uses, like copiers, to shredding, recruitment for team members, retention, training, and then we put all of our information technology expenses. So the computers that we all use, the software programs that we have, the service for all the different functions, Touchtown, the Maintenance Works Hub program that maintenance uses, the point-click care software that health services uses, the accounting software that I use. Most of these software companies now have changed from selling you a program to putting it in the cloud, and then you have to pay a subscription fee monthly to cover those expenses, and so those can be rather high.
Okay, when it comes down to salaries and everything, I know we have the minimum wage issue, But outside of that, who's making the decisions on creating all the new positions?
So your question is about the salaries, and the first thing that you said was, we've made the adjustment for a minimum wage, and then we have a consulting company that looks at all the different job descriptions for the communities, and then what it does is benchmark those job descriptions against everyone else in Richmond, and then it'll do it for Virginia in a national average, which will give us a wage band. And then we can compare that wage band to where our current team members are at and make sure that they're being paid appropriately. So the first thing that we done with wages was we did a step up to bring anybody that was below $15 an hour to that wage band. And then anybody between $15 and $20 we brought up a little bit. And then to your point, for other compensation, that's looked at based on your job and how the skills and certifications, required for that. And then as an overall, to your question about the organizational structure for positions, the chief operating officer, chief financial officer, the chief executive officer, the vice president of administration, and all of the executive directors, they have input and make recommendations to the board on organizational structure and any new positions that might be created.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you.
One more if you have it. Maybe we're not. Well, I want to thank you, James, for helping me today. Thank you so much. He did all the slides, something I've never done, and helps us with our finance committee. He's right there with us answering questions, and so please help me give him thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for being here as well, and everyone that's watching, anyone that will watch, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with everyone. I really appreciate your feedback.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carol and James. And there's so much interest in this sort of thing. I think we'll be having you back. I think you will. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. We will be having a regular VACCRA business meeting in February, and all the membership and any new members who would like to come, we'd be glad to have you. Thank you so much. Have a good day.